The day is the 14th of April, 1844. The place, Bodmin Moor. The event, a murder. Yes, you've guessed it. It's another epic ghosts, myths, and legends. Are you sitting comfortably? Shall we begin? Today's tale is all about the ghost of Charlotte Dymond, and oh my bejesus, is this a twisted, weird tale if ever there was one. Oh, I know I like to bring you weird little doozies with little things at the end so you can think for yourself what happened, who really did it. But there are some that you look into and you research and you're like, it really hits you, and you're like, ooh, this is really upsetting, and I don't know which way I feel it went, but I just feel really sad about everything that happened. But anyway, let's get crack-a-lacking and then we can have a little discussion at the end. Charlotte Dymond was a domestic servant on a farm right on the edge of Bodmin Moor between Camelford and Davidstow. The farm was Penhale Farm, and it was owned by the widow, Mrs. Philippa Peters. Remember that name, it's very important later on. There was the widow on the farm, her soft son John, and two other farmhands, John Stephen and Matthew Weeks. They were both in their early 20s, and Charlotte was a late teen. Now, Charlotte was said to have been a pretty girl with a really flirtatious nature, and Matthew was said to like to dress well. People thought that he dressed above his station. It wasn't right, and they didn't like him because apparently he was also very abrupt in his attitude and very abrasive to others. But despite all of this, Charlotte and Matthew became a couple. And a lot of people didn't like him and they thought he dressed above his station and everything, and he was always seen as an outsider. He was very loyal, but because of how he looked as well, he was meant to have been very plain with really pock-marked skin. He was missing lots of teeth, he was short, and he had a really heavy limp. So you can imagine people weren't overly keen on Matthew, and yeah, they were really surprised when Charlotte became involved with him, so it were. Some people obviously like to say that's because Matthew came into a modest inheritance and that's why she chose to be with him, but you know, we don't know, maybe stranger things have happened. You can't tell who the heart falls in love with. But someone else was also very keen on our Charlotte, and he was Thomas Prout, who was 26. He was the nephew of Mrs. Peter. Now, Thomas sometimes helped out labouring on the farm, and he worked with Matthew a few times. Some say the two of them got on, but the main consensus is they did not get on at all. The word at the time was that Thomas had it pretty bad for Charlotte, and he was really into her. He's meant to have told Matthew a few times that he could easily take Charlotte away from him if he wanted to. And John Stevens himself has goaded Matthew into saying that, oh, he's overheard it, and that, you know, Thomas can easily take her from you. It's not just Thomas saying it, you know, the other farmhands going, he can take her. You know, it's not going to be easy for him to take her away from you, is it? At all. So, it's all brewing up. People wanting the other one, retaliating. Retaliating isn't really a word I wanted. There are people stirring the pot like we get now, you know. When Thomas was goaded him himself, he obviously, you know, he's quite an abrasive guy, apparently. You know, he might have a bit of an attitude. He'd be like, you know, if someone pisses you off, you're going to say it. And apparently he had a retort to Thomas that got him reprimanded by his boss. The 14th of April, 1844 was a Sunday, and as such, they would have all been in the Sunday best. And Charlotte and Matthew went for a walk. Charlotte in her red shawl and striped green dress. The evening came, and only Matthew came back. Now, this is where it starts to get really tangled, and there's like two sides. Well, I mean, there's probably more sides, and it's very hard to see what's what. In researching it, it's like one's like this and one's like that, and it's very convoluted. But like I said, it's very sad. But anyway, obviously, as soon as Matthew came back, and then when they did realise that Charlotte wasn't there and everything, they started getting wary of Matthew and thinking that Matthew was to blame for whatever had happened. They, you know, were like, oh, she's disappeared, it's got to be something to do with you. They didn't know that she was murdered, obviously, until about 9 days later, when her body was found on the bank of the River Allen in the shadow of Rough Tar, Cornwall's second highest point. Now, some parts of the tale say that on the day that Charlotte was murdered, Thomas was also at the farm, and he said that Charlotte had received a letter of employment from another farm. Now, it's important to know that for whatever reason, on the March the 25th, Mrs. Peter hired John Stevens and sacked Charlotte. Why she was still there 3 weeks later, no one knows. No one questioned Mrs. Peters about this at the trial. So it's kind of, why was she fired? Why was she still there? Why was it never mentioned? But anyway, that was just one of the many things that Mrs. Peters was never questioned about during the trial. And despite the fact that she did have, she had many discrepancies in her testimony, she was never brought up on any of it. But she was Cornish royalty, basically. She came from a very well-known, established, well-named family in that area and everything. So it was basically, you know, oh, she's good stock. We're going to take her word about everything. Just as when they did find her murdered, and obviously started blaming Matthew, the reason for the murder came out as being it was jealousy over Thomas Prout. But the only witness at the trial, at least, who said this, and it was taken as given, was again Mrs. Peter, who also failed to mention that Thomas was her nephew. Anyway, but moving on from that bit, so obviously she's been missing and no one knew she's dead for a while. And then suddenly, 9 days after she was missing, Mrs. Peter decided to call on a search party and go looking for her, to which she was found. Again, nobody questioned why it took her so long to put together a search party or start to wonder what happened, because on that day it had been a very wet, rainy, foggy day, and the moors are obviously really treacherous in that weather. But anyway, I digress. Right, so we're going back to the day that she was killed, Thomas, and the letter. And Thomas at the trial said that she received the letter, and then she said to him that she would meet him at Davidstow Church at 6 p.m. that evening. But she didn't keep the, I don't know, date, arrangement, appointment, meeting, whatever you want to call it. But after that, there's no real sort of thing with Thomas. It's like no one seemed to say, well, if you were so keen on her, which she said, or that, she was fond of you and she was going to meet you, but she didn't turn up and you were worried about her, why didn't you go back to the farm to see what happened to her, or why she wasn't coming to see you, or if anything had happened to her? But he didn't, and there's no mention of it. And it's weird that he only ever mentioned it at the trial. He didn't say anything to anyone else about it on the day. He also was never asked or cross-examined about why, when other members of his family joined the search party for Charlotte, he didn't. Another weird thing as well, which I don't know if it throws suspicion on him and if people knew about it, is that he is buried at Davidstow Church, but it is in an unmarked, unknown gravesite, which is very bizarre. But anywho, some people on the flip side said that Matthew's shirt, when he returned back from the walk, was torn and his trousers muddied. He was also meant to have had drops of blood on his shirt. But he said that he hadn't been on the moor. They went for a walk. It must have been along the path and not actually on the very moor. So he hadn't been on the moor. And he kept saying that Charlotte had been offered a place at Blissland and was a few miles away, which was a few miles away from where they were. She was going to stay at an acquaintance's house on the way. Now, obviously, as it was Matthew that told them this, and people were starting to think, yeah, you. John, as in the one who was goading him, and someone else set off later on to check Matthew's story and found that apparently there was no place off at Blissland and that she hadn't spent the night at the acquaintance's house. Matthew put on his best clothes and left the farm, never to return. When Charlotte was found, they saw that she had been killed by a very deep cut in her throat from ear to ear. On later examination, they think it was made by 2 cuts. A warrant was then put out for Matthew's arrest. He was found at his sister's in Plymouth, and apparently he had a pair of ladies' gloves and a blood-spotted lady's hanky with him. Matthew was tried at Bodmin Assize Court, August 2nd, 1844, with the flimsy evidence against him and the coroner, who made it very clear that these wounds could not have been self-inflicted. Matthew pleaded not guilty, but it took the jury just about half an hour to find Matthew guilty. He was sentenced to be hung to death. In the days he was in Bodmin jail, they questioned him over and over and over again. And all he was saying was that he was innocent, he didn't do it, that she had taken another job at a farm, and it got too much for him with her gone that he just, couldn't take it anymore, and he went to his sister's. 2 letters were attributed to Matthew in the time that he was in jail. He was illiterate, so both were dictated. Now, the first was meant to be a letter to his family, and we don't know what was in there. The second is meant to be his confession. Now, there are 2 sort of written versions out there of what excuse me, of what was in the confession. So I'll tell you them both. But these are the things that had people actually start to question maybe he is innocent, because the way that they were written down, even if he's meant to have said them and they were dictated, is they're very eloquent and very well put together for someone who's meant to be, as some people have called him, a simpleton and illiterate, uneducated farmhand. Okay, the first one that I found was, I hope young men will take a warning by me and not put too much confidence in young women, the same as I did. And I hope young females will take the same by young men. I loved that girl as dear as I loved my life, and after all the kind treatment I have shown her, and then she said she would have nothing more to do with me. After this was done, then bitterly I lament, thinking what to be my end. And I thank the judge and jury too, for they have given me no more than was my due. Now, the original Apparently it's called the original, I don't know. But anyway, this is what one article said was the original that was actually posted, I think in a newspaper at the time. So he, Weeks, declares it was not a premeditated act, but when on the moor she stated to him that she was fonder of Prout than of him, and then he says upon her telling him that he was seized with a sudden impulse that he would never allow her to have any other than himself, and then he cut her throat. Now apparently that one made people turn to Thomas anyway and be like, well, if you hadn't been messing around with her as well, she might still be alive and it's partly your fault. And then he sort of went into the ether and vanished a bit. At 12 noon on the 12th of August 1844, Matthew was hung in front of a crowd of several thousands outside Bodmin Jail. He is buried in the prison's coal yard. On Friday, June the 13th, 1845. No, I think, was it 1845? It might be 1875. I will check that and put a thing up. A monument was erected on Charlotte's site where her body was found, and I'll put a little picture up there for you. Now Matthew haunts Bodmin Jail, and Charlotte haunts the moors looking for someone. She's been seen walking around like this, like you do when you're looking for someone and it's sunny and you can't see. She has been known to curtsy to people and whisper good evening. People have heard a girl's laughter near where Matthew says he left Charlotte, and the same voice saying, I don't want you to come any further, go home. Charlotte was 18 when she was killed, Matthew was 23 when he was hung, and Thomas was 32 when he died. Matthew's coffin floated as if it was filled with water when it was lowered into the ground, and obviously there wasn't any water around because it was their coal yard. Now, what gets me is, why was Mrs. Peters so strange? She didn't mention anything. She took so long, almost like she knew that something had happened. She wouldn't say that Thomas was her nephew. It's all very strange. Why did Thomas only at the trial suddenly say that she had a letter of appointment and that she had gone, she was going to meet him, and he never went to look for her, find out, even though he's meant to fancy the pants off of her? And if Thomas said that she had a letter, but when Matthew said that she had an appointment, no one believed him, and then all of a sudden the place that she'd been offered, they said that it wasn't, but did John actually go there, was it John? Did John actually like her as well as those two, and he was annoyed that she didn't like him? And that's why he goaded them, because he wanted them to sort themselves out. Maybe he thought those two would come to blows and one of them would get rid of the other, and then she would be free for John, because to me John seems a bit of a slimy character. And they say that you can't inflict those wounds yourself, but we know that people have killed themselves by cutting their own throat. As horrible as it is, I wouldn't want to do it. And the fact that later on they examined it and said it was 2 cuts, well, maybe it was because she couldn't do it the whole way, or she could only, and then she had to do that, maybe. Some people have said that she got pregnant, we don't know which one by, and she was shamed, and so she ended her life. People have said, oh, that can't be because there are 2 men fighting over her and willing to have her, but things were different back then. And say if Matthew was going to marry her and she would marry him because of the inheritance or whatever, but he found out that she was pregnant and he knew that he hadn't done the deed with her yet and it was Thomas's, then he might throw her out, and then Thomas might throw her out. There's no guarantee because 2 men liked you back in those days and you got pregnant that they would have you, so maybe she was shamed and killed herself. And the thing that they say that he had a few little spots of blood on his shirt, to me, if you're standing behind someone and you cut them, and we all know that arterial spray just psh, 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 even if you're behind, some of that is going to splash on you. You're going to get more than a couple of little drops. You're going to get a hell of a lot of spray everywhere. What if she had called it off with him and they had a fight and she just scratched him a little bit and that was some blood. Or maybe he'd hurt himself somewhere and there was some blood. Or maybe he found her and was scared, and that is why he actually left, because he was scared that it would happen, and it did. And he took her hanky because he found it and because he loved her so much. You know? I mean, it is possible. There are just too many factors in it. Some people have also looked into it and said that there is no way that really he could have done it, because if he was that short and that crippled, as they said, with a really heavy limp, that he managed to go out for a walk with her. People saw him sort of talking to where he said he left her. Have time to take her to that stretch, bump her off, leave her body, get back. If it was that covered in blood, he'd have to quickly change his clothes into something else. Then talk to your employee, or by about 7 p.m. they said it's not feasible. He just wouldn't have been able to do it at all. And yet he was the one who got hung and lost his life. I mean, if it was nowadays, people would look into it, it'd be done, wouldn't it? You'd have blood splatter experts, you'd have DNA, you'd have everything that they do now that they just didn't have. They would have had a fairer justice system. Basically fairer, we know it's not always, but a fairer one. At least there would have been some cross-examination of them all. It wouldn't have mattered, you know, if, oh, you're a well-known name and thingy, who cares, we're going to question you. It would have been so much better, because it is sad, because no matter whatever happened, there was hearts broken, there was deaths and sorrow and sadness, and an 18-year-old and a 23-year-old. Okay, Thomas lived to be 32, but he just suddenly, I don't know what happened to him, he died. And he's buried, whatever he's thingied in. Charlotte was buried in Davidstone Church as well, but hers was unmarked for ages. That might be one thing. It took a long time for her grave to be marked. I think they took like a crossbar out of one of the church gates and put over it. Now she's got a proper slab. But is Matthew haunting the jail because he knows he's innocent? Is Charlotte haunting them more because she knows that Matthew didn't do it and that someone else did it? John? Thomas? Or that she did kill herself, and she knows she killed herself, but because they erected this monument which says that she was murdered by Matthew and everything, that's trapping her spirit here because she knows that isn't true. Though, if she was pregnant, would they have found that out when the coroner examined her, or would he have just looked at the cuts on her neck? See, these things, they get to me as well, because you're never going to know. You can't go back in time, which is a shame, and we can't, you know. The only way you'd know she was pregnant if the baby was far enough along that she would know herself that she was pregnant is to dig her up and see if there's a little baby skeleton inside of her skeleton. And no one's going to do that. I mean, it'd be interesting, but anyhow, that is the poor, sad, twisted, weird, tangled, convoluted tale of the ghost of Charlotte Dymond. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, and become part of our spooky crew. I don't know why I said it like that. Hit the bell so you don't miss a video. Thank you for watching. You are amazing. Thank you for once again taking my hand, walking down the steps, opening the gate and entering the crypt, and viewing some more of our dark, spooky tales. You mean the world to me. Thank you for taking a few minutes out of your time to watch me. Take care of yourselves. You're so important. If you can't be good, be careful. And as always, my wonderful spooky crew, I will see you on the flip side. beware the wicked redcap. He'd love to see you dead. He'll take all of your blood and wear it on his head. Hi everybody, how are you doing, my lovely spooky crew, on this very strange, sunny and then really heavy showery April day? It's been a while, I know, I'm sorry. Easter holidays, working, trying to fit everything in, but I'm here. I've got some videos coming up to space out for you. It's going to be great. If you're new here, a very warm welcome to you. If you like the video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button and become part of our spooky crew. Anyway, today's video is all about red caps, or bloody caps as they are also known. They are part of the goblin family, and they are known predominantly throughout Anglo-Scottish borderlands. They look like, well, goblin-y like, but sort of wizened up small old men, very wiry and gnarly, and they they're around 3 to 4 foot tall, and they weigh roughly around 50 pounds. They are evil, vicious little shits, and these bags of evilness are sometimes hunched back, leathery skinned. They have these big smiles that are filled with these large, sharp, pointy teeth. They always wear like really big, heavy iron boots, and their caps are always freshly bright red. Now, their caps are bright red because they are soaked in blood. Okay, hence why they're called red cap or bloody cap. Now, while they seem to love killing and torturing and just being evil little poo-poo faces, they have to kill in order to survive and stay alive, and they know this, and while they take glee in doing it, they do have a purpose for doing so. They need to constantly murder. They absorb essence of everything they kill, and their caps need to be constantly soaked in the blood of their dead, not as in their dead, as in the kills that they make. At least once every 3 days, because if it isn't, the red cap will just simply disappear, simply cease to exist. Poof, gone. Nada. And as I said before, they're totally aware. They know that this would happen, and so they happily carry on killing and doing what they do because they like it and to survive. Red caps like to live in ruined castles on the Anglo-Scottish borders. They like to throw stones at people who try and shelter in the castles, either crushing them to death, or if they haven't crushed them and they're still alive, or they've only just hurt them a bit, or they miss totally, they will then finish you off or hunt you down and kill you with their pike, which they're always carrying around with them. And one thing to remember is, even though they're all and heavy booted and everything, you can never ever outrun a red cap. Now, as is in the way, put your teeth back in, girl. As is the way with a lot of our ancient traditions and our ancient legends and everything, there comes a point where religion comes into the fray and gets mingled up in our ancient legends, and the same thing is true of the red cap story, because whereas before being like goblin and part of the magical fae connections and everything, you would kill them with cold iron, anything like that, because it's deadly to them. That would be how you killed them. But then Christianity came along, and the way to get rid of a red cap now, if you ever do come near one and one of them decides to stab you with a pike or crush you, you need to recite quotes from the Bible, or make the sign of a cross, or show them a crucifix if you have one and you wear a crucifix, or if not, you know, vampire movies. Anyway, and then they will disappear with a scream in a flash of flaming flames, and they leave behind a large sharp tooth. Now, there are other stories of red caps, but these red caps differ a lot, really, a lot from the red caps of the Anglo-Scottish borders. There is another red cap in Scotland, and he is very different to the other little murderous little buggers. He lives in Grantully Castle in Perthshire, and he is nice. He's very good. He's known to bestow good fortune on anyone who happens to see him. There is a lot about them on a website called vampire.com. Excuse me. I always knew that the kids had colds in the holidays, and that it would mean that I would get it for going back to work, because that's sod's law. Always the way. Anyway, this website says that the red caps in Ireland are known as the vampire's cousins because of the killing and the blood, and and their hats are actually made from dried human skin. The Dutch have red caps. I apologise if I haven't pronounced it very well. I hope I do. No offence is intended. I'm just not very good at pronunciations. Called Kabuta Mannequin. They wear red head to toe, and they do tasks and chores around the houses where they live. They have this thing where in the evenings when the chills are on a bit, and to keep the house warm, they do something called invisible fire, and obviously it doesn't hurt, but it keeps the house toasty and warm. I could do with that because I'm such a reptile. That'd be so nice. And so they live in the household, and they do chores and help out, and they're very nice. But as with sort of different pixie legends and different those sort of things, if you give them new clothes because you're really happy with what they've done, they will then vanish, never to return to you. They're happy, they're free. It's like Dobby. Master gave Dobby a sock, I'm free. In Kempenerland, again, sorry for pronunciations, a miller who had a red cap, he had a red cap, did he? Oh, that's a footballer. Who had a red cap living in his house, was so pleased with how well his little red cap worked that he gave him new clothes as a reward, to which obviously the red cap was like, oh great, I'm free, new clothes, I'm happy, thanks for I'm gone. And after a while the miller was like, oh, I don't have my servant anymore, and there's no one helping with the chores around here, and I kind of miss that, and I miss him, and I'm going to get him back. So he knew that in Kempfnerland there was a bridge that the red caps crossed over daily to get between their land and our land and do what they were doing. And he was like, I'm going to wait. So he, went down, lay in wait, looking. And eventually, obviously, along came a procession of the Gabuto Mannequin. And right at the end of the procession, really proud as punch with his new clothes, was the old red cap of the miller. And he's like, right, I'm going to grab him, I'm going to pounce. And as he pounced to grab him, he heard his wife's voice calling for help from the river. So as he turned to try and find his wife and see what she was doing following him, and why was she in danger, the red caps had all gone. And when he turned back to carry on getting him, when he knew his wife wasn't there, and it was like, oh, what's that going on, they had all disappeared. Now, some people think that the red caps on the Anglo-Scottish borders are the way they are compared to other, like Dutch and the Perthshire ones, and there might be different ones out there, but they think that they might be the way they are because, well, one, the castles that they live in, they used to have their stones bathed in human blood to sort of purify them and keep them safe and everything, and They think that caused ghosts to live in the castles, which could evolve into the red caps. Or the red caps are there because it's such a worn, torn area. There was so much fighting and anger and bloodshed along the borders that they couldn't help but evolve into such vile, evil, twisted creatures, because it was there constantly. It was constantly around them. It was almost in them, in the essence, in the ground. That is why they are these bloodthirsty little suckers. Anywho, a little quick video all about the red caps. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you did, thumbs up, hit the ding-a-ling, subscribe, join us. I hope you have a wonderful day, whatever you're doing. I hope you manage to take 5 minutes out of your day just for you, whether it's a beautiful, deep, centering breath, a little bit of meditation, just 5 minutes to stare out the window and see what's going on around you. Read a couple chapters of a book. Do something you enjoy. Have a nice cuppa, a little drink. Look after yourselves, it's important. Thank you for once again coming down the stairs and entering the crypt with me and finding out some more things about our wonderful, weird, spooky heritage. You mean so much to me. Thank you to everyone who's watching, and thank you to our new subscribers that we had recently. You are all amazing. Excusez-moi. I must now do the unglamorous side and do some tidying up. Life. As always, if you can't be good, be careful, and I will see you on the flip side. Watch out for all the spooky things, my loves. Goodbye.